everybody. Welcome to GRIMMCon. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really super excited to be here and talking about some finishing moves. So thank you for everybody for inviting me here, and so let's get going. So this is how to detect finishing moves before it's game over. And I'm sure we have some Mortal Kombat fans that are out there. So why don't you, put in chat or, whatever, just to tell me, who your favorite Mortal Kombat character is. Maybe there are a couple, maybe it's evolved through time, finishing moves in Security definitely evolved through time. Although, some of them have been around probably for, a dozen years. But so who's your favorite one? Mine is definitely, you'll see in my character sheet, Katana. Thank you to our marketing department for coming up with this. It's super cool. She's rocking a mask, so she's, keeping it safe, but, also with some cool defense tools there. My signature move is Honey Pot Hellfire. I don't exactly know what that means, but, we may introduce it as some kind of feature right in the future, because that's kind of a cool name. I'm not super stealthy, but, the glasses help with sight, so that's a plus. Origin story is Protector of the Realm. I love defense and detection, and Hacker of Mental Health. So I'm CEO of Mental Health Hackers, and you can find us at Hackers Health if you want more information on that. So here we go. What exactly are finishing moves? We know what they are in Mortal Kombat, right? Finish him. I wish I had, the soundboard. I'm sure there's the Mortal Kombat soundboard out there, so you guys could have a little bit of a peek back into that kind of stuff. Maybe you still play. The new one's pretty interesting. So, but as far as information security, these are detections that should be considered high fidelity and high priority threats. So when one comes through, it's almost certain that it's not going to be a false positive, and you're going to need to engage incident response at some point, right? So when you get a solution that's reporting this kind of activity, context is extremely important, right? You don't want an alert that's just the name of the alert, maybe a link to a Wikipedia article or to a MITRE technique or something like that. Like, that's not super helpful. It's really important to have some kind of analysis and explanation of not only what's being detected, but why, like the information around it, why is it bad? Sometimes you'll get this with an MSSP. Sometimes, you may have to build this into your own environment and whatever thing that you're using. That's what we try and do inside Blumira, and is build all of that into the product. So, because not everybody is going to be a subject matter expert in all areas of defense and incident response. Like, I'm definitely not. Like, as much as I enjoy it and love it, I'm not, the subject matter expert in all of that. That's a huge, huge, huge section of stuff, right? You can defend against all technology, so there's no way you can be an SME in all of that. But it's better to have some kind of analysis and understanding of what's happening during at least these finishing move attacks, other than that title, right? So I've also heard of several different solutions that, when the customers ask, why wasn't this certain thing detected? You'll have a pen test or, some sort of incident where they're like, okay, I know this definitely should have been detected. I've heard several times, well, your environment isn't baselined yet. You haven't had the especially when they're doing proof of concepts, right? Your environment isn't baselined. It's not been, there long enough to figure out what's normal and what in your network and what's not. There are a ton of things in an environment that should never need baselined. All right, that's what these finishing moves are. We like to differentiate different types of detections in different ways, so you'll see those in the use cases we're going to go over here in a little bit. But most of what, the single point in time detections that we use are called indicators. You don't think of them as IOCs, but just like, this certain thing happened right now, I want to know about it as soon as possible. it's not something that, should wait 20 minutes for a query to run, or, 24 hours for you to get a report, or maybe the off chance that you log into the solution and see, oh, this thing is bad. There are certain things that you should know about now, right? So those fire as soon as possible in the process at Blumira, even before they're stored on the database backend. And the examples that I'll show you here in a little bit are all of those kind of things. So along with the detections that we'll go over, having playbooks, so either from your SIEM vendor or internally, are going to help you follow through for a quicker response. And I guarantee you that time to detection, time to response, time to remediation are going to be some of the key cybersecurity metrics in coming years. I know a lot of people are using them already, and honestly, it's one of the best things we've seen as far as metrics that you can use to pay attention to your program maturity. So our first player here is Sub-Zero, and he wins, right? So that's definitely a finishing move there for Raiden. And, maybe that's just like a active view of what the bits look like during this Kerber hosting attack. So I'm not going to go too much into the inner workings of how Microsoft Active Directory authentication functions, or how to successfully exploit it, but, we'll get into a little bit of it. We can't touch all of those things in the short amount of time that is a talk, but we'll cover some of the high-level things. And we'll discuss ways to detect both in your environment. So first I'll cover Kerber roasting, and then AS rep roasting, and then right now we'll go over a little bit of differences, or high-level differences, right? So Kerber roasting is an enumeration attack on accounts in Active Directory, using the Microsoft SPN, which is Service Principal Name ticket function, while AS rep roasting is an attack that specifically is against accounts that don't require pre-authentication. So Active Directory requires pre-authentication by default, but on an account-by-account basis, you can disable it, with a check mark, right? As far as the request goes from the attacker, with Kerber roasting, the threat actor enumerates Active Directory and uses that SPN ticket, right? So it's the Kerberos ticket granting service, and they use those for the SPNs that have been gathered. With AS rep roasting, they request the ticket granting ticket. So a little bit of a difference there. One's the service enumeration, one is the actual ticket. The response from the Active Directory domain controller in Kerber roasting is going to respond with that ticket, right? And that ticket is stored in memory. So that's where you end up getting the extracted hashes from, to go down to the extracted part of Kerber roasting. And then with AS rep roasting, the DC responds with the ticket granting ticket. So that is actually captured from the data packet that comes across in that response. So two different attacks that definitely both against the Active Directory authentication functions, fairly common, extremely easy to run, and we'll go over some examples of that. So to be effective, an attacker during the Kerber roasting is going to have to select what kind of encryption is susceptible to those brute force attacks. In Kerber roasting, it's almost always RC4 HMAC. So, and we see it's a favorite of pen testers, but then you might ask yourself, is it still being used in the wild, right? Are there attacks that is it just like, oh, this pen tester is doing a proof of concept, great, that's you, but do people actually see this in the wild? Well, yes, they do. So especially ransomware has actually adapted to use those kind of techniques to infect networks. So DFI report not too long ago had a really good in-depth analysis demonstrating the use of Kerber roasting when ransomware wants to spread throughout a network, and it did that really, really quick. FireEye has a really good report on Kerber roast attacks, and there's been accounts of like different healthcare agencies and manufacturing, banking that uses that as part of the attack, right? To just spread that malware through the network. So here is a little video. Let's see if we can play this. There you go. So this slideshow shows the roasting itself and how it's going to end up with the result here. So this is invoke Kerberoast. It's looking at Active Directory. You can run a variety of tools to do this attack. You can find accounts that are doing things like running IIS or SQL or, some higher privilege accounts. And Kerberoasting is not taking advantage of any kind of vulnerability or anything like that. I know that it's pretty quick. Let me play that again so we can kind of go over it. I kind of get on a tangent. So this is invoke Kerberoast. And I have multiple screens. I promise I'm not ignoring you. So you can see here the same account name. So like there's default app pool and IIS. There's the hash, distinguished name, pound town in this specific instance. But it's not a vulnerability in Active Directory. It's how Active Directory is built. That's what authentication is. It's just intercepting that authentication and stealing the tokens. And you can't block that behavior. Any account can do this that's on the network. So unless you want to turn off authentication altogether, or switch to something else, which is definitely possible. But the problem with trying to detect that is specifically that, right? You have a really hard time detecting different roasting techniques because it's using the same authentication mechanism that everything else in the environment is. So if you want to know that specific kind of stuff, you need a way to do that. But before we do the detection part, let's go on to AS rep roasting. Without playing this video again. There we go. All right, so speaking of finishing him, there you go. I think Jax wins this one. There we go. Oh, that glorious, right? So moving on to AS rep roasting, we went over the differences and and then we'll cover a little bit more into AS rep roasting and then both the detections. And then just to point out, creating these slides, this one always gets me. So there's no way we could have used any of the newer Mortal Kombat GIFs, but because boy, do they get pretty graphic now. Pixelated blood splatter is pretty great. I talked about that checkbox that you can mark in each individual account, and that's what that is. And a lot of times there are AS rep roastable accounts, it's a tongue twister, for different reasons. I've seen it both as, trying to get some legacy piece of software to work with authentication because, maybe, it was back from Windows NT and they did not need it. So, they don't work with that pre-authentication method. So people will go in and check that. Other times, I've heard of just sysadmins, help desk, whatever, just needing to get something to work. They're like, oh, I was trying to get, this user couldn't log in. So I was going through and checking things and I must have left that checked. Some kind of, not great method, but, it's not inherently, it doesn't show the risk here, right? It doesn't tell you that could be used for that kind of finishing move. It's just a checkbox, right? No big deal. So then we'll see in the next demo the Rubius account, the Rubius tool that we'll be using to run that roasting attack. So here, the most important thing on this slide is you can actually audit your environment to see what has that enabled, right? So this is a PowerShell script, command, whatever, for get 80 user. And it's looking for accounts that don't require that pre-authentication, and it's going to return those to you in the command line. So pretty important. Know that it's out there. I'm sure these slides are going to be shared later, so feel free to run that if you have an on-prem Active Directory environment, just to see what you have that you may not know about. So here is the AS rep roast itself. So here we see Rubius running AS-rep roast, and then easy peasy, right? Same thing, AS-rep hash. It's pulling that out of the packet that's being responded. So if you like run Wireshark or anything like that, you can actually see that in the packets. You can see that hash in the packets. And then this shows how you can kind of use those. I think this is the next one. Maybe. Nope. Next slide. There we go. And running demos and slides is always hard when you're trying to record it. So this is using Map Exec to use those cracked AS-rep roasting accounts to spray those creds everywhere and find where we're the local admin. So again, there's a handful of different ways to detect password spraying and brute forcing against a multiple of platforms, but again, we have only so much time. So we're assuming here that the hashes we took in the last walkthrough have been captured and cracked, so you can use those to, try and pivot, right? So passwords are usually not that hard to crack, but we can use them, we're going to maintain persistence maybe, pivot, move laterally, all of those kind of things to kind of get a little bit further into the environment. So how about the detection? So who's going to win in this case? Our Honey Token account or Goro? That's a crossover that would be kind of fun, I guess. I mean, Winnie the Pooh is a bear, but he's a stuffed one. And there's, a lot of arms there to deal with, so maybe not. So to detect both Kerber roasting and AS-rep roasting, the best way to do this is with Honey tokens, Honey accounts, Honey whatever, right? It's an account that you're going to add to Active Directory to monitor on. So in Kerber roasting example, it's the event ID 4769. Your ticket encryption type is 0x17. You have ticket options there, which equals something. I can't remember exactly what. And then the service name is going to be whatever Honey account that you have. Okay. And then as far as AS-rep roasting, the event ID is 4768 instead of 4769. Same ticket encryption type and options, but the service name here is KRB TGT, which is the Kerber roasting ticket granting ticket. So in addition to Rubius, you can see in the screenshot here, there's also Invoke AS-rep roast by Harmjoy, as well as a handful of other tools that are, that can perform those kind of attacks. And, in the bottom of that PowerShell script, you can see right there, the tool finds 3 separate accounts with that pre-authentication enabled and enumerates all of them. So as with any kind of active deception technology, you should monitor your Honey accounts, Honey tokens, whatever, way more than a normal account. And it's definitely possible, to perform this attack in some environments with active accounts. But those accounts are going to be used all the time, right? Maybe they're there because they have to have pre-authentication on. But so you can't really detect on those all the time. You're going to end up with way too many alerts and, alert fatigue, and you're going to want to ignore it, right? So using a Honey account is way better. And you can closely monitor those and, everything involved. And they're going to be, this kind of stuff is going to be more easily compromised. Even if you don't have accounts that have pre-authentication in your environment, still add a Honey account. You'll know when somebody's attempting to do that AS-rep roasting. And just remember, never allow those accounts to have any kind of elevated permissions, right? So this next slide is going to show you Dojmira. So let me pause this for a second. So Dojmira is a PowerShell script that we have out there on our GitHub. If you just search Blumira in GitHub, you'll find it. It's a PowerShell script that is going to generate the specific kind of accounts that you need for these detections to be created. Okay, so it'll output what those accounts are, and you can take those and use the other things that I showed you and alert on those specific accounts. So here we are. I'm in my Blumira directory, and I'm just going to run the PowerShell script. And that's it. Super easy. Goes ahead and adds that account. This one, the video for this is just the curb roasting one. We've since added the AS rep roasting after actually a really good suggestion from one of our customers. So let's see here. Not on to the next one. So instead of playing this again, there we go. We're going to move on to the second use case. So W-Digest, super fun detection. Here, there we go. Another finishing move. Rain, unfortunately, does not win on that one, but we got some cool blue spikes and some more pixelated blood. Fantastic. So W-Digest is a really old protocol. It's introduced in XP, I think, where in certain situations, you can enable it in the registry to fall back to clear text authentication. In newer versions of operating systems, it's disabled by default, but the registry entry is still there, and you can still enable it with local admin. And that will allow an attacker to come back later and extract hashes and clear text passwords directly from memory. Because why bother cracking something if it could be in clear text anyways, right? So again, there's a lot of opportunities for this one, but as far as performing the attack itself, but we'll see here with crack map exec again. I always have a hard time saying that, especially when I'm being recorded. So it's going to be planting that W-Digest trap by just flipping that registry key. So you have local admin access. You're going to run that switch. So that's the device it's being run on. The user that we cracked earlier, and then W-Digest. And we're going to enable them. And then right there, it tells you that it was created successfully. So yeah, handful of easy tools out there that can do that, but it's always going to be that same registry key. So how do we detect that? Fairly simple. Sysmon is fantastic. If you don't have it installed, I highly recommend it. And I'll show you, I think it's in the last use case we're going to go over, the difference that Sysmon gives you as far as detection capabilities go and how to map some of that stuff. So in this case, you're just detecting a registry change. So Windows Event 13 through Sysmon is just for that purpose, is for registry changes. So your process name is going to be reg, because it's going to be like regexe, reg whatever. Here you can see in that bottom part the actual command that was run. It was reg add through CMD. It can be done through PowerShell. Crack map exec again. Oh my gosh. Maybe I'll just start saying CME. I feel like at this point it would be easier, and you know what I mean. All right, so yeah, here's the detection on that. And then the command or the parent command line is going to have that W-Digest user logon credential in there. So it's flipping that bit on. So it's going to mention something about W-Digest, something about that specific key in the registry. So you can detect on all of those kind of things. Sadly, we have seen some false positives from poorly written software. So for some reason, I don't know if they just didn't want to figure out how to do real authentication, or they need to capture credentials for some reason, but there's definitely some software platforms out there that do this as a part of how they work, which is kind of sad. So on next is a fun one. Everybody always covers, pass the hash. You see the poor little scorpions there. Oh no, their poor dad. Cover the children's eyes. Poor little scorpion. It's pretty great. I don't think this part was actually in the game, I'm gonna guess. Maybe it was. I don't know. I didn't play that much, but I feel like this is definitely some good work on somebody's part. So this is mostly seen with Mimikatz. You know, you'll definitely see pass the hash being mentioned all the time with Mimikatz, but there are a handful of other tools out there that can pass along those captured credentials to gain access to other endpoints. You know, which if you're using the same admin account across your entire environment, that can go really, really poorly for you. I recommend if you are still running Active Directory on-prem, look into LAPS. It's local admin password solution through Microsoft. It's definitely better for preventing pass the hash with admin credentials, because as soon as one, you know, I've seen lots and lots and lots and lots of networks that, I mean, it's easier, right? If you are re-imaging, you know, dozens or hundreds of desktops for a new deployment, it's just easier to have the same admin password. You know, you have 20 help desk people or maybe one, I don't know, but it's easier because they can memorize that password and then, you know, go work on any device that they need to. It's super common. So, you know, passing the hash with really any admin account is going to be bad, but it's seen a lot with the local default admin also. So this is going to show this next slide is going to show the pass the hash attack with using CME again. All right, let's play this. So here we see CME being run against a host. And then we're just going to pass the hash that we captured, you know, one of those other several ways, right, that we may have captured a hash. And right there, you know, I know it's a really quick video, but it goes really fast, especially when it works. You know, you can, you know, in that case, you're only scanning one endpoint. So if you're scanning like /24/16, like it may take a little bit longer, but you know, it showed there at the end that it was successful. So also, again, sadly, there's actually a lot of backend stuff on bad software that will do pass the hash. So that's why I have in this detection. So it's Windows Events 4624, which is login. Login type is 9, and then the process is like sec logo. And then that's why I have the fourth little mention there of tuning for terrible software. I have a list of at least 5 or 6 pieces of software that just as a part of how they do administrative processes or manage your environment, or, you know, I've seen Active Directory management tools that, you know, they're going to, you know, help your help desk change passwords or, you know, maybe even change control or manage endpoints as far as like asset inventory go. They use pass the hash on the back end, and boy, they shouldn't, because you know, recently had a discussion about why like is there any good reason to have exceptions, like antivirus exceptions or you know, exceptions on this kind of stuff, right? Like I mean, the reason is you don't want alert fatigue. You know, if you have a main piece of your environment that is going to trigger this detection once, twice, 10 times a day, you're going to have to figure out some kind of tuning, right? But, you know, I'm sure a lot of you have played with firewalls or have seen firewall rules, but the concept is least privilege when it comes to even tuning. So if you know what hash is always doing it, you can use that, especially if you're using sysmon, because the hash values are in there. If you know what I mean, obviously the exe is okay, but that can be spoofed. The directory, also not great, because you put anything in that directory and then nothing's going to trigger. And if attackers know that, they're going to take advantage of it. If they know software A does not, mimics past the hash on the back end, they're going to do what they can to mimic that. And if you have a blind spot to like that whole directory, that's what's going to happen. You're not going to be able to detect on something like this that is bypassing the administrator login. So how about credential dumping? This is great too. I don't know, I think right away Scorpion wins. That's super quick, right? Flawless victory. Didn't even get a chance. So dumping Active Directory hashes. No matter what way it's done, what tool is used, if it's a script, third-party application, built-in Windows application, if all of your hashes from your entire domain has successfully been captured, and it's not just a pen test, you're in for a really, really bad time. I would love to know if anyone has ever either had to follow the Microsoft guide on network eviction process, or starting a forest over from scratch, because those are basically your two options. If there's any time to move to the cloud, I guess it would be then. Because if an attacker has that and you don't follow the network eviction process, you have no guarantees that they don't still have a token or a ticket or some kind of persistence in your network. So as much as I loved doing sysadmin stuff for a very long time, that just seems extremely, extremely stressful and so much work. So I'd love to hear your stories if you've gone through that. So this slide shows doing run as domain admin, and then using Mimikatz to extract all the hashes out of Active Directory. So that's the password we cracked, and now we're into, Mimikatz directory. Zoom in a little bit on that. So you have the right privileges when you do privilege debug, and then you're going to do an LSA dump on the domain. And ta-da! There's all of them, which some Active Directory environments are extremely large. There are a multitude of ways to detect this kind of activity. A common one being what we saw here, but then attack this directory, oh my gosh, sorry. So common way of attacking. So this one we just saw, which was Mimikatz, but there's also one that you can use that's built in to Windows called NTDS util, and we'll go over that one too. And this one will show you a little bit the difference of sysmod in between just Windows like plain logging. So again, hash jumping is going to be something you want to know as soon as possible, and definitely does not need a single bit of baselining, because as the more time passes, the more likely that attacker is going to be able to move laterally, set up persistence, perform other attacks inside the environment. We saw Mimikatz in the video example. Here's another one-liner, right? So NTDS util is a built-in Microsoft utility. So if you ever hear living off the land, that falls into this category. So that NTDS util was created to manage the Active Directory database, right? Which completely makes sense. It's been used for years and years to perform functions, but it can also be used by threat actors to dump the ntds.dit file. So ntds.dit is the ESE database that contains all of the Active Directory information. You can use it to create a backup, and the threat actor can use that and then go crack all of those credentials. So instead of capturing 1, 2, maybe 3 credentials using the other ways we saw in the beginning, this is everything. They can take the entire database and go crack all the hashes at once. Here we can see in this matched evidence portion the actual command and the device it was being run against. And, you know, that NTDS util, I just told you what that did. ACI NTDS is setting NTDS as the active instance. That's what AC means. IFM is install for media, and then creating the full backup. That QQ is just quitting both commands that it's run. So let's dive a little deeper into the detection engineering side of this. So I hope a lot of you have Sysmin installed. Feel free to say if you do or not, and why you don't. If you don't, I would be interested to know that. But here are some major differences in this attack using just seeing the Windows event IDs and then seeing all of the Sysmon event IDs. So on the left, you just see a huge list of 4799. You also see process creation, but process creation with Sysmon is the event 1, and don't worry about like blowing up your screen or like looking really, really hard, because I'm going to blow up these things in the next couple slides. And I'll go a little bit into why I picked Sysmon event 1 as opposed to the process creation and just Windows plain. So on the left-hand side, huge list of 4799, which enumerating security group memberships happens all of the time in Active Directory for a multitude of reasons. It's definitely, again, part of how Active Directory works, to provide, you know, information to clients, applications, whatever. And then on the right-hand side, you see huge wall of text, tiny, tiny text, with a bunch of information we're able to gather using Sysmon. So let's move on so you can see this a little bit better. So this is event ID 1. A little closer up, you can see that NTDS util is the original file name there on the top, the command that was run, the full command line that was run, who ran it. There's me, yay. From the parent image of PowerShell, I think is on the bottom. Yep, all the way to the bottom. If you see the parent image and then parent command line, I was just running it through ICE so I could capture it. And it provides way, way, way more information about that newly created process when that command was run. So like the hashes it gives you there, and you can correlate against those. You see it's terminal session ID 7. It's because I was logged in over RDP when I ran it. And then you can use all of that to correlate across, you know, when different stuff like that is run. If, you know, you want to baseline your environment, you can use that. But that command should never be ran by anyone. Maybe an admin does it every now and then. But at that point, you should be able to, you know, tune out that activity. Here's where we see event ID 10, which is a process being accessed. So this is one of the 10 events that's included in, that is included in Sysmon that Windows doesn't have no matter what you configure. You know, there are certain things that Sysmon has that Windows does, but you have to configure group policy, like several different places, or, you know, you have to turn features on or something like that. So like, to have process creation show command line arguments, right? Like anything on the PowerShell command line or the regular command line. For a regular Windows event to show those, it shows up in, you know, multitude of Windows event IDs, but you also have to turn on several settings and group policy just to have that kind of thing happen. But process being accessed, you can't even do. You can't do no matter what GPO thing you configure. And, you know, we see it here, you know, it's, you know, basically it's still PowerShell using NTDS util, and then what it's accessing underneath that granted access is the space and memory. And then leads us to the third one, event ID 13, which is a registry value being set. So this populates whenever that process executes successfully. So you see where it was executed at, that it was NTDS util. Now, how to detect on this? Many different ways. All right, so many different ways to detect on NTDS util being used in general. We can detect on you know, the first example was Mimikatz, right? There's like a bunch of different ways to detect on Mimikatz. In this example, though, this is just dumping Active Directory with NTDS util. So you can detect on that Windows Event ID 1 through Sysmon. This is the first one that I showed. The process name is going to be some version of NTDS util. I have there because there are tools that try and do obfuscation of those commands. So you can kind of get around that with doing likes and different kind of regexes. And then the same thing with the command or the parent command line. For this example, we just have the QQ in there. So to wrap up a little bit with some detection planning. Who here on a regular cadence tests your SIEM? Somewhere or another, not counting having a regularly scheduled pen test. That obviously should be testing your SIEM, but do you test it at any other point in time? Just think about it. The amount of things that can go wrong in any given day when it comes to the implementation of an alerting system. You could have an endpoint client that suddenly stops, the service stops, or maybe a network firewall rule or a local firewall rule is put into place, or maybe there's a piece of an endpoint software that stops the export of logs. Maybe the mapping or the parsing of those different things into fields that you're looking at has changed. After doing this for years, vendors, Windows not so much, but vendors in general will change the format of their logs. We've got a firmware update or a software update or this update, and now there's a space in the logs, or they renamed a field, or the API endpoint has changed. So many different things can happen, and that's just the process. That's above and beyond, maybe there's a different way to run a tool or an exploit, or maybe there's a new tool or exploit. Doing this stuff is never ending, which is why I find it so incredibly interesting and fun. So just thinking about all of those different ways can interrupt those detections from firing. Regular testing is going to be one of the best ways you can ensure that system is working how you expect it to. Now, don't get me wrong, you're not going to be able to test all of your detections all of the time on every endpoint. That would be incredibly large amount of time, and I'm sure you have better stuff to do than that. However, prioritizing what endpoints and top tests you want to ensure continue to work is a really good first step at planning those ongoing tests, and I'll show you a little bit how we do that too. I also highly recommend adding parts of detection testing into any tabletop you might be doing, whether it's tabletop in general, or maybe you're creating IR playbooks. Put some testing in there, run it through from beginning to end. See what happens if you try and dump those credentials. That's just one command. Obviously, you should have, approval and not just do it on random, Active Directory environments. But running those commands, seeing if it's been detected, and then what? If that's not a pen tester, then what? Do you have some kind of agreement with a third-party IR firm? Do you have any plan? Do you have, even if you just write it on a sticky note, bad thing happens, call number, right? That's something. That is something more than a lot of people do have. I've been involved in a large number of tabletop exercises, and they identify those gaps in detections all the time. When you're walking through a real life scenario and you come up with this situation, you're like, oh my gosh, I completely forgot, that SQL server talks to that web server that, backs up to this thing. And, we've never tested those backups. So we have no process on that. We didn't know that that's how, I'm the only one that knew how that information flowed. So if I leave, nobody else will know that kind of stuff, that you may never have thought of before. And also highly, highly recommend that you have an active relationship if you have a SIEM vendor, whether they're your MSSP or, you run it internally. Having that relationship, especially if they're an MSSP, is one of the things that I love. I love having active customers that test my detections all the time. We've come up with some great detection ideas. Like, oh, they ran this tool, we didn't detect it, and oh, that's why, because they're running it this way, or they ran it, from this script that called this thing that, there's a lot of different ways you can get around detections. And it's great to have that kind of relationship with your vendors. So another main detection creation strategy is using adversary emulation, right? So running those tools. And one of the ones that we use at our disposal is called Vector, and it's free, it's out there. So vector.io, and you can import a lot of different frameworks into the tool, and I'll give you a few examples of what we use when we went down like our detection creation journey in the beginning. So here you can see a heat map of the MITRE ATT&CK framework imported into Vector. So each tactic, there are commands and other adversary emulation, notes, tests, whatever, that you can perform and track. They're using the atomic red team test through Red Canary, which also a huge fan of. And if you've spent much time in either the attack framework or atomic red team, you can look at what to map those to. I'm sure there's other things that you can import into Vector, like pick your favorite adversary emulation technique or framework. Like there's a lot of stuff Vector does fantastically, right? And it can be a daunting task at first, right? So it makes it easier to kind of track that stuff, especially if you're doing all of this stuff internally. It's a lot of work, right? You look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, you're like, oh my gosh, there's thousands of things there, and I have to worry about this, and I have to worry about that. Prioritizing and mapping them in here makes it so much easier. And like, I don't have anything to gain by telling you to use them. I just think it's a great tool. And then in the next couple of slides, I'll just pick one of these and I'll show you kind of what that looks like. So we dive into this specific one. It's Windows Discover Domain Trust with NTL Test. That's another not NTL, NL test. So diving into that one, there's a few different sets of information. This is the red team portion, right? Vector does a great job of separating out the different stuff into different fields. And here it gives you the description of what it is. It gives you the operator guidance, which is the test you want to perform, and why it's potentially malicious. So it also lists here, like, this technique's been used by the TrickBot malware family. That's great. I mean, I suppose depends on whose viewpoint, but it's great information to have, right? So that operator guidance has, the specific, and this is just one example, right? This is just one tiny little command. Some of them are a little bit more in depth, and you can use those to kind of, I'm not a red teamer, right? I don't know exactly how all red teamers do all of their stuff, but this is great if you're going to start down that journey into where to even start on creating those detections. And then that same technique page, they offer a section for blue team detail. So this is where you can track the status of the detection in your organization. So, any other notes you have can go in here. We use this for going through all of our sysmon detections. We'd perform the red team attack, save our working query, which is kind of blacked out here because there's customer specific information in there. And then we save it in our working notes, right? We test it again after we've created it in the application, use our notes, whatever, see if maybe there's other iterations that we can use, different flags that may bypass the detection, and then complete that specific emulation. And there you go. You have a detection created. So at the time we were creating these, it was just the sysmon related ones, but you could do this with anything. You could do it with your endpoint. This is obviously the query is going to differ depending on what type of SIEM you use. And if you're attempting to see, the other detections, you can import and have different tracking things for your endpoint solution or network IDS, IPS, other technologies, plain Windows logs, whatever. You can have different sections in there that you try and cover all your bases for. And that's it. So hopefully that was helpful to you all, and I hope you have an awesome rest of the con. This is going to be super fun, and have a great time watching all the other talks, and hope to see you in real life soon. Thank you.